Navigating love with my 32M boyfriend has been a roller coaster. We met in August 2022 and he confessed, "I can see myself falling in love with you so fast." But after countless ups and downs, including his family's rejection, he claims, "I need my dad's permission. Can love conquer all?" My boyfriend, 32 years old, and I, 39 years old, are either concluding our story or beginning a new chapter in our book of love. Should we marry or not marry? Longest Reddit post in history. This is a long story post. I apologize in advance. I'm a 39-year-old female and my boyfriend, fiance, and roommate is a 32-year-old male. We met for the first time on August 15, 2022, and there was an instant attraction between us. I asked him if he had a Facebook account since it seemed less forward than requesting his phone number, but I knew I wanted to see or at least talk to him again. He replied, "No, I deleted it to get away from my crazy ex." Before I delve too deeply into the story, I need to provide a bit of history for context. He hails from a large, strict Romanian Pentecostal family and is the oldest of 11 children born to the same mother and father. Unfortunately, his mother passed away a little over 7 years ago. In their culture and belief system, perhaps specific to his family, they believe children should stay at home with their families until their wedding day. Once married, they are free to leave and live with their spouses. Until that point, it is considered taboo to leave home, regardless of one's age. Whether in your 30s, 40s, or 50s does not matter. You are expected to remain with your family of origin. I was raised in the Christian faith with many of the same beliefs he and his family hold, but I was never part of any church or specific denomination. As an only child, my father left and abandoned my mother and me when I was just 8 years old. Before that, I witnessed a great deal of abuse and domestic violence. I was very neglected by my father. After his departure, my mother withdrew me from school, supposedly to homeschool me, but that never happened. I became both parentified and isolated. I grew up very poor. My mother never worked, my father never paid child support, and our only income came from a modest rental property my mother owned, which provided about $200 a month, along with the charity of churches and kind strangers. Moving forward, I ended up marrying my first husband at 19, who is also the father of my now 18-year-old son. My mother manipulated us into living with her, and as I knew no better and had no experience, we stayed. I did love him and I intended for it to last forever. However, shortly after the birth of my oldest son, issues forced us out of my mother's home, and during that process I discovered that my first husband was a wanted child predator in the state of California. He was arrested, and once I learned all this, I filed for divorce. That risk to my child was something I was unwilling to accept. At this point, I was 21. I met a man at my workplace, and to make a long story short, I ended up marrying him. My intentions were good. I believed we would be okay, but after our marriage, he became severely abusive and cruel. He did awful things to me, and he was also not kind to my son. So after 6 years of marriage, I ultimately filed for divorce. I could no longer endure the abuse, nor did I want that life for my son. After that, I had a year-long relationship, but thankfully I was never married to that person as he was worse than my previous husband. I ended that before it could escalate further. Eventually, I met a man who had been an acquaintance of my mother and me over the years. This was in January 2014. We dated briefly and got married. Once again, I thought this would be my chance at stability and a peaceful, happy marriage. At that time, I was 29 years old and he was 52. I spent 9 years married to him, 8 of which we lived together, a significant amount of time. Initially, everything seemed fairly good. He was not abusive or mean. However, his mother, may she rest in peace, told me early in our marriage he is going to change one day. I was unsure of what she meant, and before she could elaborate, he rushed us off, saying he would not change and that I should not listen to her. I did not think much of it until a few years later when I began to see what she meant. He became very cold and distant, withholding much intimacy and affection. Eventually, he largely stopped working, spending his days playing video games, obsessively focusing on computer programming, or doing unfinished writing projects. The lack of affection began in late 2016 and worsened over time. In 2017, I approached him and expressed, "I feel neglected and lonely. You're always busy on your computer and you're not meeting my needs as a husband. Can we fix this? I want to save our marriage." For a brief couple of weeks, he seemed to make some attempts, but that quickly faded and we returned to the same patterns, which progressively worsened. Fast forward to the COVID-19 era, I took some time off work. At that time, he completely gave up working, and although we were together constantly at home, there was no intimacy, no passion, and no romance. I felt no love whatsoever. Towards the end of 2021, I returned to work, but he remained unemployed. While both of us were off work during the pandemic, I kept us afloat financially. I sold some precious belongings to pay his mortgage. He owned a house he acquired before we married, but even after our marriage, he never included me on any mortgage documents, utilities, or the property deed. It felt as if I did not exist in that sphere. Nonetheless, I ensured that bills were paid, handling all financial responsibilities alone. He never stepped up to help, and that was acceptable if he contributed in other ways, such as keeping the house clean. However, the house was in a hoarder-like condition. He would not allow me to clean it properly and did not clean at all. I miraculously had a baby born in August 2021. Between late 2016 and August 2022, I repeatedly pleaded with him to step up. At the start of 2022, I confided that I was beginning to develop wandering eyes. I did not want to cheat, I aimed to work on our relationship, but I could not do it alone. I asked him to please show me some love, recognize me, or at least greet me when I returned home from work. Sadly, my attempts fell on deaf ears. Every time I returned home, he was either on his computer or asleep, failing to acknowledge me. I discovered that he had deep feelings for another woman he had known since she was 12 years old while he was around 21. He claimed to have fallen in love with her then, but he ended up with her mother, believing that being with her mother would protect the girl from her mother's abusive behavior. Naturally, he did not remain with the mother and they separated. Once the girl reached adulthood, he attempted to be with her, but that relationship did not succeed either. Thus, he held out for her for 25 years until our paths crossed again in 2014. At that point, he decided abruptly that I would. However, after I discovered this history and observed the way his face lit up whenever her name was mentioned, along with the excitement in his voice, I realized he was, in some twisted way, still in love with her. Despite my attempts, I felt increasingly lonely. Now let me share my boyfriend's story, which will help illustrate our story and the reason I am posting here. My boyfriend left his family home in February 2020. He moved out in an attempt to be with his crazy ex, as he referred to her. However, here is the catch. She was an escort and he fell in love with an escort. Despite having used the services of many escorts since about 2016 or 2017, she was the one he wanted to give everything to and he gave her his entire heart. He became involved with methamphetamine through her, losing everything both financially and emotionally. He tried to leave her a couple of times but always ended up returning. When I finally met him on August 15, 2022, he had just managed to escape that situation again. He had been sober from methamphetamine since July 23, 2022, so he was newly out of a very bad environment. We met in a training class at work. After he told me he didn't have a Facebook, we spoke briefly and then parted ways. I thought about him quite a bit, wondering how he was doing and hoping to see him again. Fast forward to August 31, 2022. I saw him on my way to clock out. I was leaving the parking lot, but when I spotted him, I stopped and called out to him. He didn't hear me the first time, and perhaps I should have let it go, but I didn't want to, so I gently honked the horn, which gained his attention. I asked how he had been and told him I remembered him. He came over to talk, and he said he remembered me as well. During the conversation, albeit brief, I mentioned, I am married and cannot be anything more than friends, but would you like to go to the Quick Trip, a popular convenience store chain in our area, sometime for a donut and iced tea and have a chat? He agreed that it sounded nice, acknowledged my marital status, and said we could be friends. However, I think we both secretly desired more. After giving me his phone number, I texted him later that night, and we arranged to meet the following evening on September 1, 2022. When the time came, I waited for him at Quick Trip. He called to say, I need to tell you something before I come over. It could be a deal breaker for you, and if it is, let me know without hard feelings. I replied, okay, what is it? He said, I am homeless. I am living at the shelter. I'm trying to work my way up, but right now I am homeless. Responded, is that it? He insisted it was. I said, don't be ridiculous, that's not a deal breaker. I still want to hang out with you, so please come over. He asked, are you sure? I affirmed, yes. He said he would arrive in a few minutes, and he did. I bought us something to eat and a couple of drinks, and we sat at a table outside talking and talking. At one point during our conversation, he stopped, gazed deeply into my eyes, and I felt as if he were looking straight into my soul. He has beautiful eyes, by the way. He said, I have to be careful because I can see myself falling in love with you so fast. That was the moment I realized I was in love with him. I fell hard. Moments later, my mother called while we were sitting outside and my boyfriend wanted to answer. Assuming he was joking, I said, sure, go ahead. To my surprise, he answered. He introduced himself as my friend and invited her to join us. She accepted and we all sat and talked together. From that point on, we made time to see each other after work and sometimes during lunch breaks. I was a cab driver and he was an hourly wheelchair non-medical transportation driver every single day except for 2 days when our schedules conflicted. We communicated every day without fail from that night until now. Early on, within the first couple of weeks, my boyfriend rented a hotel room to escape from the shelter and gain some privacy and access to a decent shower. He invited me to join him to watch a movie or share a meal. I should have known, and I probably did, what would transpire, but I decided to go anyway. I spent the day with him there and we ended up sleeping together. Afterward, I felt guilty and returned home. As usual, my now ex-husband lay on the bed as I sat in a chair and confessed, I made a mistake. I slept with another man. He looked emotionless, which led me to think he might be in shock or confused, so to ensure my point was made, I clarified, I just had sexual intercourse with another man and for all I know, I could be pregnant by him. I was not and am not. I felt it was essential to be honest about what had happened, but I did not know what I expected him to do. What he did was not what I anticipated. He patted the bed and said, it's okay, come lie down next to me. As expected, the situation was awkward. Nevertheless, my boyfriend and I continued seeing each other every day for the following months. Eventually, I discovered at least twice that he was attempting to reconnect with his escort girlfriend. This hurt me deeply. It angered me because, for some unknown reason, it made me feel betrayed, even though we were not official at that time. I confronted him about it, held him accountable, and helped keep him away from her and her drugs. According to him, I most likely saved his life, if not kept him from going to prison, as she was a very bad influence on him. As time passed, he began to recognize the path he would have likely taken, a road that would have led directly to his destruction. He tells me and others when this topic arises that I helped save his life. Eventually, his family discovered he was seeing someone, me of course. They confronted him about it and he confirmed it, providing a brief explanation about me, namely that I had a child and that I was not Romanian. They instantly disapproved based solely on those two factors. My boyfriend had entered a program through the shelter that provided him with a small apartment to share with a roommate. His job was to follow their rules, go to work, and save as much money as possible. He was required to save 80% of every paycheck. In return, he could live rent-free and build savings. This program was meant to last for 90 days. He began it in September 2022, and he remained clean, worked, and saved diligently. The program's ultimate purpose was to help participants regain self-sufficiency. Once the program concluded, they would assist individuals in finding their own apartments and provide help with the first month's rent and furniture, setting them up with savings for emergencies to enable them to continue working and paying rent, ensuring stability. However, the program was supposed to last for 90 days, and even by the end of January, beginning of February, he was still in the program. I decided to move on from the intolerable loneliness I faced with my ex-husband. I needed a safer and cleaner environment for my little boy. It also felt wrong to be in a relationship with someone while still living with someone else, and I was done with that situation. I had clung to hope that things would improve, but deep down I knew they wouldn't. I was also acutely aware that if I did not leave, I would encounter problems related to my son's environment, and I did not want that. Therefore, I sought assistance from a place that helps families or single mothers find shelter. I spoke with someone who mentioned she was a mandated reporter. Naturally, I did not want to disclose everything, so I kept it vague, stating only that I needed a better situation for myself and my son. She placed me on a waiting list and I left. Nonetheless, I felt concerned that someone might come to check things out, which could lead to me losing my son. I had already made the decision to leave that day, stay at a hotel with my child, and pay rent daily until something came through. While I was packing our clothes, a loud knock resonated at the door. It was the police, who announced their presence clearly. I felt terrified and took my little boy, hiding in the bathroom while I called my now boyfriend, asking him to pray that they would leave quickly and that I would not face any trouble. He agreed to pray and then said, "Tell me the address and I will be right there. I'll make sure they are gone and take you both out of there." He did exactly that. He came over, drove around to ensure the police had left, then loaded my child and me into the work van he utilized. Even though he wasn't supposed to, he went ahead and did it and took us to safety. That was all I expected him to do, and I hadn't anticipated anything beyond that. However, once he accomplished it, I didn't think more was necessary. He surprised me by taking us to the motel. He went inside, I provided the money I had for one night, and said he would rent it in his name to avoid leaving a trail in the system if my now ex-husband attempted to locate me. When he re-emerged, I realized not only had he paid for that one night, but he covered an entire week out of his own funds. This was on February 1, 2023, just before the Super Bowl, which meant hotel prices were soaring even for the most unsavory places. Yet he did not seem to mind and did not stop there. After securing the room, he took us to Walmart and spent over $500 to purchase everything we needed: a crib, a mattress for the crib, bottles, milk, and absolutely everything essential. He even bought a food and water bowl for our dog, along with dog food, a harness, and a leash. He truly got everything. This was the first time I genuinely felt he loved me, as someone does not ordinarily act like this simply to be nice. Upon returning to the hotel with our supplies, he assisted in bringing them inside. However, he also moved himself in and did not leave. He spent that night with us, moving whatever little belongings he had from the transitional housing apartment he had occupied for the last 5 months into the hotel room with me. He left that program. You see, he wasn't supposed to touch the savings he had accumulated, which totaled a bit over $15,000, until the program concluded and he had his own place. Yet he chose to access those funds to help us, either out of love or pity. A couple of days into our stay at the hotel, we sat in the back hatch of my car and I asked, "Can we officially become boyfriend and girlfriend and commit exclusively to one another? Because I want that." It took him just a few seconds to respond, and he said, "Yes." At that moment, we became official, exclusive, and a couple. We eventually found an apartment in March, and by the time we moved in, he had depleted every penny of his savings. He had given up his job to support us, prompting us to seek other employment, which we successfully did. We lived together in that apartment from March 2023 until the end of August 2024, at which point we had to vacate due to inability to afford rent. It has been a challenging journey, yet we now reside in a more affordable studio. As an important aside, I feel it necessary to mention that early in our relationship, just a few days or perhaps a week or two in, my boyfriend expressed several times that he wasn't looking for a relationship. He wanted to concentrate on work, getting closer to God and his family. However, while residing in the program and spending time together every day after work prior to the events involving the hotel, he would often suggest that once he secured an apartment, I was more than welcome to come over to enjoy movies or hang out, which I correctly assumed also included other activities that accompany being at someone's apartment, if you catch my drift. He seemed willing to keep me as a secret while leading a double life that complied with the expectations of his family while living according to his own desires in secrecy. Herein lies my concern. His actions did not align with his words. His words indicated, I don't want a relationship, while his actions communicated, I do. This inconsistency leaves me confused, but that is beside the point. Throughout our relationship, we have broken up verbally multiple times, always with him being the one to initiate the separation. The last time we split was in August 2024, and I believed it would be final. I packed my belongings and my sons into the car and drove away, intending never to return. However, within 5 minutes before I even had the opportunity to block his number through my tears and anger, he called me and said, I messed up, I don't know what I'm doing. I was hesitant to return because I had endured so much pain from this back and forth, but I felt an inner voice telling me to go back and check on him, so I did. I found him kneeling on the floor, crying bitterly. I embraced him and tried to offer comfort, expressing that I still loved him. I left it in his hands to decide our future. He wiped his tears away, sat down in a chair and said, I need more time to make a final decision. If we go together to get a marriage license, can I have more time? I'm not promising I will marry you, and you must understand the risks if we go get it that I might not marry you. But if you're comfortable with that, do you want to go get a marriage license and allow me more time to ponder? I agreed, and we went together that very same day to obtain a marriage license. At the end of August, we moved out of our apartment and temporarily stayed in hotels until we got into our studio. Now here we are nearing the end of the year, and he has resolved to make a final decision by the new year. Despite our mistakes, neither of us feels comfortable living as if we are a family without actually being married. That is not how we were raised to do things right. Because of this, we are refraining from having intercourse, and this is critically important to me. I am receiving mixed signals. Some days he is affectionate, while other days he is distant. However, one constant remains. I love him and I want him to be my forever. He is the most wonderful, amazing, funny, lovable, and sweet man I have ever met. Despite the pain I have experienced, and the many days I have spent crying and the feeling of losing my mind and the fear that he will leave me and my little boy, who has grown very attached to him over these past 2 years, he stepped into our lives before my little boy could even walk. He was barely 1 and now he is 3. I cling to hope that he will recognize my love for him. I hope he will understand that I am not the other girl who hurt him so badly. I hope he realizes he can make a decision without his father's approval, which appears to be of utmost importance to him. Perhaps he is using that idea as an excuse. After all, he left home just fine, and if the previous girl had desired to be with him, he would have pursued her regardless of the consequences concerning his family, who definitely would not have approved of her either. Regardless of his reasoning, he insists that his family's opinion is paramount. He once said during one of our verbal breakups, I need my father's permission and consent. I wanted to think he was joking, but he was serious at that moment. This man has a very disorganized attachment style, also known as fearful avoidant, and if you have not gathered yet, I possess a very anxious attachment style. Thus, neither of us has a secure attachment style, which is ideal. We have yet to acquire it. I have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, often abbreviated as BPD. While my boyfriend has not received a professional diagnosis, I believe he might also exhibit symptoms of BPD. I also suspect he may exhibit some form of bipolar disorder due to his mood swings, alternating between extreme happiness and deep sadness or irritability. He struggles with social anxiety and finds being around people or in crowds unbearable, whether shopping or at a park, anywhere where people gather. My point is that we both have issues, but I genuinely believe that with enough time, effort, and dedication, issues can be resolved. I am convinced that if two people love each other deeply, they can grow together, improve themselves, and support each other to become better versions of who they were before. One crucial detail I neglected to mention, which I believe is important, is that my boyfriend's family wanted him to undergo a specific program to assist him in overcoming methamphetamine addiction and to distance himself from the destructive lifestyle. However, he rejected that route. He preferred to quit cold turkey on his own. They used this choice as a long-standing excuse to withhold help from him in any capacity. He could reach out to his father for assistance when he was hungry and cold, sleeping on the street in the middle of winter, but they refused to assist him. They have completely turned their backs on him, except for his father, who occasionally meets him at a neighborhood park. His twin sister did not even wish him a happy birthday last year. Only his father did, late in the day alongside one of his brothers a few days later. He is unwelcome at the family home and has been for a long time. They have not invited him over for a single Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, family barbecue, or any family function since 2020, long before we ever met. However, now miraculously, if he leaves me and conforms to their expectations, they will consider welcoming him back and begin to reconnect. His father would suddenly come to bless his new home, but the stipulation would be that he must start from scratch at the bottom, perhaps even back in the shelter, working his way up again. Once they observe him doing things their way, they promise they will become a family again. I might be crazy, perhaps I am, but that does not appear to represent love to me. It feels more like conditional love manipulation to force someone to adhere to your desired way of living rather than allowing them to live their own life. I keep reminding my boyfriend that if we marry, his family will likely accept that reality and eventually invite us all to family gatherings or barbecues. Conversely, I explain that if he chooses to leave me, he is risking the possibility that they may not fulfill their promises of family unity, leaving him utterly alone to contemplate the consequences of his decisions. I stress that he would never be able to meet their ever-changing expectations. I also express that if he opts to walk away from me, he will lose me forever. I am done if he decides to leave, but should he abandon this relationship and his family doesn't materialize, he will ultimately find himself alone, contemplating the one that got away, the woman who loved him wholeheartedly and accepted him with nothing from day one. When we first met at Quick Trip, he had no savings and was not even in the program. He will reflect on the little family comprising us that he had pieced together. During our first encounter, he confided, "God or whoever, it doesn't matter, just let me have her. I must have her." Now that he has me, he is afraid to advance to the next level due to concern over his family's opinions from a family that turned their back on him. He struggles with a commitment to raising my son even though he has been doing well at it over the past 2 years. He seems to believe I can do better than him, yet I consistently tell him, "I don't want someone better than you, I want you. I love you with all my heart and we need you in our lives." He claims to have made a pact with God that if we do not succeed, he will remain single and celibate for the rest of his life, as he supposedly doesn't want to hurt anyone else like this. I assure you that if he exits my life, I will be done with relationships and men altogether. This situation has irrevocably shattered the tender place in my heart that someone could have appreciated. Sometimes, a person gets hurt so deeply that they simply shut down and forget everything about love. That is the story for the most part. So I ask you, do any of you have a similar experience or regrets about someone you allowed to slip away? Do you have any advice for me and my significant other? That is my affectionate term for him. Humorous, isn't it? I genuinely love this man and he knows it. I believe he is partially afraid of being hurt again and also apprehensive about what comes after marriage. I continue to remind him, nothing is truly going to change, I will still be me, the only difference is that we can be intimate. We have already endured so much together, and if we have made it through all of that, what makes you think we can't handle anything else? I apologize for the lengthy story. If you have read this far, I greatly appreciate it. Please share your stories, experiences, and advice. I welcome different perspectives, thank you very much. Story 2. From small-town Canada to Ivy League, I thought I'd escape my strict upbringing. You're on probation, I heard, terrified to tell my immigrant parents. But the real horror, betrayal by friends and a haunting title of slut after my assault. Can I ever reclaim my truth? Throwaway account. I am from a small town in Canada. I received a full scholarship to an Ivy League university. I grew up in a strict household that prioritized academic achievement above everything else. Immigrant parents, a tale as old as time. I was 17 when I began university and excited about all the freedom and rule breaking I could engage in. I went a little wild and discovered that being a freshman female at fraternity parties garnered a lot of attention and free alcohol. I enjoyed it all, meeting students from big cities who appeared sophisticated, wealthy legacies who carried purses that I had only ever seen in magazines. The guys were so cool and friendly. I had the freedom to make whatever questionable decisions I desired. It was a very hedonistic time for me. This was also around the time that the Facebook.com, which was its original name, was first launched, and I now realize that I became somewhat addicted to social media in those early days. My grades suffered as a result of the partying and the time wasted online, and I was placed on academic probation. One of the conditions of my probation was that I needed to take a semester off. I was terrified to tell my parents, so I pretended everything was fine. I secured an apartment off campus. I was not allowed to live in the dormitory since I was not enrolled in classes and was on probation. To support myself, I got a job at a bar and later took a second job at a restaurant. The bar where I worked was in the small college town adjacent to the university, and many older students were regulars. I made a lot of friends among juniors and seniors, third and fourth year students, since they were 21. I lost many of the freshman friends I had met in classes and in the dormitories because I was effectively kicked out for a semester. Additionally, I felt ashamed, so I did not make an effort to maintain any of those relationships. I still attended some fraternity parties on the nights when I was not working. I also stayed throughout the summer because I wanted to earn extra money. That summer of 2006 was when it happened. I went out drinking with three guys I considered friends. The advantage of working at a college town bar was that I was never carded at any of the other local bars, perhaps as a professional courtesy. They all knew I could handle my alcohol, and we were all friendly with one another. All three guys were from the same fraternity, and I had partied with them many times before, and everything had been fine. The fraternity house was nearly empty as it was summer. I drank heavily that night, and when the bars closed, we returned to their fraternity house as we had done many times before. I thought I would simply crash on a random couch or bed, but they all began to hit on me, aggressively. I mean, we had been flirting all night, but that was always the dynamic. Much of the night is blacked out for me, but I have flashes of certain events. I remember saying no and trying to prevent my clothes from being removed. I recall flashes from a camera. I remember having male body parts placed in my mouth. At one point, I stopped resisting and just let whatever happened take place. I remember hearing other voices saying, "Dude, what the heck?" The next morning, I was still hazy, but I called a friend and asked her to pick me up and take me to obtain emergency contraception. I did not even know how to feel emotionally, I just felt physical trauma. I wanted to vomit even though I had not eaten, and I was dizzy. Most importantly, I knew I had engaged in sexual intercourse. My vagina and rectum were sore. I could not even fasten my bra because the hooks were all bent and protruding. I did not discuss it with anyone, not even the friend who picked me up. I suppose she figured it out but did not press me for more information. I continued with my life. I started classes again when the summer ended. I continued working at the bar because I enjoyed the people and had fun at the job. However, the fraternity guys were no longer my friends. I was no longer invited to any parties. They even went so far as to avoid coming to the bar where I worked, where they had previously been regulars. I worked very hard to improve my grades. I heard through mutual friends and former friends about my new reputation. I was labeled a huge promiscuous woman. The individuals who called me that and initiated multiple rumors about me, the three guys whom I once considered friends, I ignored the feeling and even embraced it. I was promiscuous, I drank, and I began using drugs. I significantly improved my grades, but it was not enough to meet the minimum GPA requirement after being placed on academic probation. I was facing expulsion. I attempted to appeal on medical grounds, as I had tested positive for 2 sexually transmitted infections following the events of the summer of 2006. My general practitioner also submitted a letter on my behalf explaining the anxiety and stress I had experienced. Do you know what one of the women on my review committee said to me? She suggested that they had heard stories about my extracurricular activities and that my medical reasons were neither relevant nor sufficient. She stated that this was an elite school for elite students and that my conduct did not meet the standards they expected from their students. Up until that point, I had told no one that I had been raped. I do not even think I admitted it to myself. I did not include it in my appeal to the review committee, which decided to expel me from the university. I still do not speak about it. My husband knows, but I do not bring it up or share any details. I understand it is not something to feel embarrassed or ashamed about, but I just cannot discuss it, and I cannot shake the feeling of shame. I eventually graduated from a university in my home country. It is not a prestigious one, but at least I completed it. I have since moved to Europe and have a wonderful family. Still, this haunts me. I think about it often, analyzing, dissecting, and reflecting. If I include this university on my resume, which can be beneficial since it is a name that is recognized internationally and impresses employers, I feel like a fraud because I did not graduate from that institution. Even if they retain any record of me, it certainly would not be favorable. I had it on my resume for a short time, but I could not explain to potential employers why I only attended for 1.5 years, why I did not graduate, and why I could not produce a transcript. At the same time, I realized how significant an accomplishment it was to have even been admitted, and I wanted to demonstrate to employers that I am intelligent and hardworking. Every day I become more aware of how this experience has impacted me and my life trajectory. It took me 10 years to admit to myself that I had been raped. I still wince when I use that word and do not like saying it aloud. My husband is 20 years older than I am because I recognize that I distrust men who are close to my age. There are many other examples, but that is sufficient. A few years ago, I researched those 3 men online. Although I do not remember all the details from that night, I recall their first and last names. One is a lawyer in a district attorney's office, one is a doctor, and one is involved in politics. All are well respected and admired in their communities. I find it amusing but also feel a little saddened by that. I wonder if anything happened regarding the photos they took. I wonder if they remember that night, if they remember me. I wonder if they know what they did or if they truly believe I was just a huge promiscuous woman. I wonder what they would say if I confronted them tomorrow. I consider the possibility of exposing them and seeking revenge by shaming them in the same way they made me feel. Then I remember they inhabit a system that does not punish men but rewards them, and we live in a society that believes men over women. Thank you for reading and allowing me to express this.